Hi, and welcome back. Today, we're going to get a little bit real and we're going to talk about the toilet. So I'm sitting on the toilet and look at this. Can't really beat that view, huh? When you're traveling, it's obviously kind of a pain sometimes when you need to use the bathroom and you don't know where to go. And so today I'm going to give a few tips about using the bathroom when traveling, specifically on the European continent. But some of these things will also pertain to other continents as well. But today we'll mostly just be talking about the European continent. And of course, each place is a little bit different. And in some places, even in one country, you might have different rules depending on whether you're in a city or a small town or in a rural area or whatever. But these tips should hopefully help in figuring out where to and how to use the bathroom when you're traveling. If you're new here, my name is Kyria, and I have a confession. I have a very tiny bladder, and I also really like coffee and water. And so I have run into trouble more times than you could count on one hand for sure, or two hands for sure, and maybe even your toes as well. So a lot of these are things that I've learned through doing them wrong. So let's get started. The first one, and the most important one, is always go when you have a chance. Go before you leave your hotel or hostel or wherever you're staying. If you see a bathroom in a train station or bus station or restaurant, use it, because you never know when the next one is going to be or where the next one is going to be, how clean it's going to be, and you just might as well go when you have the chance. So number one is use it when you can. The next one is to be prepared to pay. A lot of places do charge for restrooms, and even in places where you might be used to not being charged, for instance, if you are driving in the US, you can always stop at a gas station or a truck stop or a McDonald's or whatnot and use the bathroom. And actually, when I was riding my bike across Canada, I used this trick as well. I would go to the Tim Hortons or a gas station to use the restroom. But this isn't always free, even in places like a gas station. In Germany, when you take the Autobahn, a lot of times you do have a place where you can pull over and get gas and food and stuff, but oftentimes the bathrooms do charge. And there are some that are now going a little bit more towards being able to use a credit card, but sometimes you just still need cash to be able to use the bathroom. So I always try to carry a little bit of change around with me, and don't think that you're going to be able to use a bill. So make sure you have a little bit of small change with you if possible. Otherwise, you may need to buy something at the snack shop in order to get change to use the bathroom. And I've had this happen to me when I was in Romania. I had just gotten cash out, so all I had was a larger bill, and sometimes what you think of as not really that big of a bill will be a large bill to them. And so I can't remember exactly what the denominations were, but let's just say it was 2. And I only had a 20 or something like that. So I ended up having to go and buy a pastry so that I could get change, so that I could go back and pay for the bathroom. This is very common in bus stations and train stations, which brings me to my next tip, which is that sometimes the bathroom on the train doesn't charge, but the bathroom in the train station does charge. So if you're taking a train and it has a restroom, then you can sometimes just wait. Don't go in the station, wait till you get on the train to go. And I found most trains that are a little bit longer distance are going to have a bathroom. Now, if you're just traveling on a subway or a inner city train, you might not have a bathroom, so you may need to use the one in the station. But if you're going a little bit further out, you probably will have a bathroom in the train. And you can look this up beforehand to find out. Or, of course, you can just pay for the bathroom in the station. But once again, note that you may need to have actual cash for this. This brings me to my next tip, which is that on buses, sometimes they do have a bathroom, but it really kind of is hit and miss whether or not the bathroom will be open. So if you take a company like Flixbus, for example, 9 times out of 10, you're going to have a bathroom and you're going to be able to use it. However, there have been instances, specifically for me in the Balkans, where there is a restroom on the bus, but it's locked or tied up or unavailable. And so in this case, usually when the bus doesn't have a bathroom, the driver will stop for a little bit of a longer break every few hours. But oftentimes, of course, you're in a place where you don't speak the language and the driver will say how long the stop is going to be. But my tip for that is just, if you see everyone getting off, just get off and go find the bathroom as fast as possible, because usually it's a 10-minute break and sometimes longer, depending on where you are. Like, for instance, in some places, you actually stop and have a like a lunch break. So it might be longer than 10 minutes, but even if you're on a 3 or 4 hour bus ride, you should at least have a 10-minute break somewhere in the middle. The only problem for that is obviously you don't know when the break is going to be. Sometimes the instructions or website isn't clear as to how long the stop will be or where you're going to stop. And so again, going back to number one, just use it when you can. So I always use the bathroom in the bus station before I get on the bus, just in case. And then of course I try not to drink any water or coffee beforehand. Otherwise I'll be hurting later on. So I try not to do that. The next tip is to always carry a little bit of toilet paper with you. It's not uncommon for some of the bathrooms to not have toilet paper. Usually if you're paying for them, they've been cleaned and there is toilet paper, or when you go into the toilet and you pay the attendant, you can grab a piece of paper from the roll. So a lot of times the attendant will be sitting outside the bathroom with a little table. You give them their change and either they hand you a little bit of toilet paper, or if there's a roll, you can grab some sheets at that point. But it still doesn't hurt to carry some toilet paper with you because you never know. And if it's a bathroom that doesn't charge, then most likely it's not upkept as much and you may need to have your own paper. The other thing that may surprise you is that a lot of times you don't put toilet paper in the toilet. So this is hit and miss. It really depends on the country. I know, for instance, my parents have septic and the septic just doesn't handle, anything thick. So sometimes this might be a place where it's septic, so maybe more rural areas, but sometimes it's just countries in general. They have older plumbing, for instance, Greece or some of the Balkan countries. A lot of times you don't put your toilet paper in the toilet. So usually you can tell that because there's a trash can right next to the toilet that has paper in it already. But sometimes there'll be a sign or something. So you just kind of have to feel it out. It's not always super obvious, but that is something that you might need to get used to. The next one is that you might need to be prepared to squat. And sometimes the only toilet available is a squat toilet. And sometimes there's a little hose next to it, and that's what you use to clean it off afterward. So this isn't quite as common anymore, but even when I was in Germany, I was in a market hall in Frankfurt, and there were like 5 stalls, but the last one on the very end was a squat toilet. And interestingly enough, there was a line of about 20 women and nobody wanted to use the squat toilet. So I went in with my friend's kid who really had to go to the bathroom really bad, and everybody just let us cut in front of them because nobody wanted to use the squat toilet. The next tip is that cafes can be your salvation. When I was in Venice, it was really hard to find a place to use the bathroom. And so I would just go into a restaurant. Luckily, I was with a friend who didn't mind having espresso every hour or so. And so he would have an espresso and I would go in and use the bathroom. And at the time, the espressos were about €1. And so basically, instead of paying for a toilet, we were paying for a coffee instead. And I was getting the benefit of the toilet. However, the next tip is that a lot of times the cafes will actually let you go in without buying anything. When I was in Wrocław, Poland, down in the old town, there's not really a lot of public restrooms as well. And we were told that basically if we needed to go, we could just go into a cafe. And most of the owners are pretty amenable to letting people go in and use the bathroom. So you don't always have to buy something, although of course you could also just use that excuse to go and have a coffee or something maybe not so diuretic and use the bathroom then. And the last tip that I have is you can use, for instance, Google Maps, or I use an app called Organic Maps, and you can find restrooms on that. So in Google Maps, if you just type in the search bar WC, you should be able to find some toilets there. And oftentimes there are also little comments about whether or not it's free or whether it's clean or whatever. And then Organic Maps is very similar. You can just search for a restroom and it will come up with the closest one. I found that it's nice to have both of those things because sometimes one will have the restroom or the other one won't, and vice versa. So I use both of those sometimes when I'm desperate and I need to find a public restroom. All right, so those are the tips I have for you today. So I'd love to hear in the comments if you've traveled and ever had trouble finding a restroom, and what tips do you use to find a restroom quickly when you need it, and or what stories do you have about this? I'd love to hear them. If this video was helpful, please subscribe and give it a like. And thank you very much for watching, and happy travels.